Just 3 minutes ago, Prince Harry was spotted rushing to the private tarmac, boarding a sleek, black jet bound for the United Kingdom. But why? What could possibly force the Duke of Sussex to abandon his life overseas and return in such a desperate, urgent rush? For months, the world has followed the Sussexes' story with fascination, gossiping about their royal disputes, media battles, and high-profile interviews. Yet, nothing could have prepared the public for this sudden, shocking development. It wasn't another headline about strained family ties or a cryptic interview. This was something far more explosive, something that pierced the very heart of what the royal family had kept hidden for decades: Archie's school records. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the scene. A quiet morning at Harry's residence abroad, a phone buzzing with urgent notifications, aides pacing, whispers of documents that had surfaced. Harry picks up the first of many alerts. An official from the palace had leaked the news. School records, usually mundane and dry, now held a secret that could redefine Archie's very identity. The documents suggested that Archie's birth certificate contained inconsistencies. Details that were supposed to be simple, his father's name, didn't align with official royal records. And suddenly, the Duke of Sussex was on the move, propelled by a father's instinct, propelled by urgency that few could comprehend. These weren't just minor clerical errors. To the average person, a misprinted name might seem trivial, almost laughable. But in the world of royalty, lineage, succession, and public perception, every detail is critical. One wrong name on a birth certificate could ignite legal battles, media frenzy, and public scandal of unprecedented magnitude. Could it be that Archie Harrison's identity, something so intimately tied to family and heritage, was suddenly under question? And if so, who would benefit, and who would be destroyed by this revelation? The palace, known for its disciplined precision and ironclad image, rarely leaks information. When it does, the world listens. And when the leaks touch a child, a direct heir, a grandson of the sovereign, the repercussions are enormous. Harry, aware of the stakes, had to act immediately. Every decision, every move, every conversation counted. The flight back to the UK wasn't merely a trip, it was a race against time. Let's pause and consider. How would you react if your child's fundamental identity, something meant to be private, protected, sacred, was suddenly questioned in the public eye? How would a parent balance rage, fear, and the instinct to protect with the very public nature of their family's position? Harry faced all of these challenges in a matter of hours. The tension wasn't just in the documents themselves. It was in the whispers behind palace doors, in the nervous anticipation of the media, and in the eyes of those closest to him, who knew the delicate nature of these revelations. The documents, when analyzed by legal experts and royal commentators, showed startling inconsistencies. Names that had appeared on official papers for years were suddenly different. The implications? Complex, multi-layered, and potentially explosive. And yet, Harry had to maintain composure. Every step taken outside the palace could ignite a storm. Every comment, every action would be dissected by journalists and social media users alike. The Duke of Sussex was caught between urgency and optics, between a father's instinct and a royal protocol that demanded silence. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the leak had sent shockwaves through corridors of power. Advisors scrambled, communications officers drafted statements, and legal teams prepared for what might become one of the most complex royal disputes in decades. The situation was unprecedented, not merely because of the documents themselves, but because they threatened to reveal truths that had remained shielded, sometimes intentionally, from the public. The notion that Harry would drop everything and fly back wasn't just a personal decision. It was a statement, a warning, a reaction to a breach that could not be ignored. But here's the crucial question. How did the palace records get leaked in the first place? Whose interest was served by releasing them now? And why, out of all possible times, did this occur just as Harry and Meghan were navigating their new lives abroad? Speculation ran rampant. Some whispered that rivals within the family sought to undermine the Sussexes' credibility. Others suggested media insiders, hungry for a scoop, had somehow obtained confidential records. Regardless of the source, the impact was immediate and unavoidable. Even the public reaction was telling. Social media exploded within minutes. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the usual suspects in the viral storm, buzzed with speculation, outrage, and disbelief. Is Archie really the rightful heir? One trending post asked. Harry rushes back to UK amid shocking records, blared another. Commentators, both casual and professional, debated every possible scenario. And while the world speculated, Harry's focus remained singular. Protect his son, understand the truth, and confront what had been hidden from him. Now, let's examine why this story matters. It's not just about the documents. It's not merely about a name on a piece of paper. This is about identity, legitimacy, legacy, and trust. The stakes are enormous, not only for Harry and Meghan but for Archie himself, whose future might be influenced by events unfolding long before he could comprehend them. The public sees headlines and scandals, but behind the scenes lies a deeply personal struggle. How does a family maintain normalcy when the very foundation of their identity is questioned? How does one navigate a world where private lives are public spectacle and history is constantly rewritten in real time? Every royal parent faces scrutiny, but rarely does it reach the scale and intensity Harry is experiencing. The combination of palace intrigue, media frenzy, and personal stakes creates a storm unlike any other. He is simultaneously a father, a husband, and a public figure, forced to act decisively under pressure. Each choice carries consequences, some visible, some hidden, and as the jet streaked across the skies toward the UK, Harry had to prepare for confrontation, negotiation, and revelation, knowing that once he landed, there would be no turning back. As the flight neared British airspace, aides whispered urgent updates. Legal documents were reviewed. Strategies were revised. Every step was critical, because once the palace doors opened, the private became public in an instant. And behind those doors, the team waiting would have secrets of their own, secrets that, until now, had remained carefully shielded from Harry and the public alike. But what exactly did the documents reveal? How could a simple discrepancy in a school record and birth certificate create such urgency? And why had no one noticed, or perhaps, no one dared to reveal the inconsistencies until now? The answers lie not just in the papers themselves, but in a web of royal protocol, personal ambition, and historical precedent. And as Harry prepared to step off that jet, the reality of what awaited him would hit harder than any headline, any rumor, or any public speculation. For the audience watching this unfold, the questions are tantalizing. What secrets were hidden in Archie's records? Who orchestrated the leak and why? And most importantly, how would Harry react, knowing that the very identity of his child, the son he would protect above all else, was now at the center of an international scandal? As the introduction closes, one thing becomes clear. This isn't just another royal story. This isn't another gossip headline or fleeting rumor. This is a confrontation with truth, secrecy, and legacy. And while the world waits with bated breath, Harry is racing against time. The palace holds answers, but some truths are more dangerous than the public can imagine. And just when it seems the storm is about to break, just as the jet touches down on British soil, Harry's world is about to collide with forces even he could not predict. And what comes next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if you landed in your home country only to realize that the ground beneath your feet was already shifting beneath you? Prince Harry knew this feeling all too well. The moment his jet touched down, a storm of whispers, flashing cameras, and urgent messages awaited him. The air at the tarmac was thick, not with rain or mist, but with tension, the kind that makes every heartbeat louder than normal, that makes even a seasoned royal pause for just a fraction of a second. Harry's eyes scanned the scene before him. There was no time for formal greetings or casual smiles. The usual polite reception of his aides and security team was replaced by a hurried, almost chaotic energy. Phones buzzed relentlessly. Advisors whispered in urgent tones he could barely catch. Every word carried weight. Every glance hinted at unease. He had flown thousands of miles for a reason, but the reality awaiting him was more immediate than the flight itself. It was here, now, in this moment. As he stepped off the jet, a familiar mix of paparazzi flashes assaulted him. The lenses weren't merely capturing a duke returning home. They were capturing a father racing against time. Questions shouted from a distance filled the air. "Harry, what's going on? Is it true about Archie?" But the Duke didn't answer. He couldn't. The moment required precision, focus, and a protective shield against both the media and the storm brewing inside the palace walls. What had driven him to take such an abrupt flight back to the UK? The answer lay in the documents. The school records that revealed inconsistencies, the birth certificate with a father's name that didn't match expectations. To the outside world, these may have seemed trivial, but for Harry, they were explosive. Every parent wants to ensure their child's identity and legacy are intact. Every parent wants to protect their child from harm, scrutiny, or confusion. Now, Harry's mission was clear. Uncover the truth and shield Archie from consequences that could echo far beyond a simple clerical error. But even as he entered the motorcade, questions began to pile up. Who had leaked these documents? How had the palace failed to notice or act on these inconsistencies earlier? And why now? Timing in the royal world is everything, and nothing happens by accident. Was this a calculated move, designed to destabilize Harry, to provoke a reaction, or perhaps to test loyalties within the palace staff? The mind races with possibilities, and Harry knew better than most that every theory had layers. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was no less tense. Advisors paced hallways, phones constantly in hand, trying to anticipate the Duke's next move. Whispers floated across corridors like invisible currents. He knows. He's coming for answers. This could destroy the narrative we've carefully controlled for years. Every footstep seemed louder, every word heavier. The leak had broken the calm surface of routine, exposing fissures that had long been kept secret. And yet, Harry's focus remained on one thing: Archie. Not the headlines, not the public outcry, not even the calculated moves of the palace. Archie, his son, his responsibility. Every parent knows the feeling. That terrifying awareness that the world might not understand your child, might misinterpret them, might even threaten them. For Harry, this awareness was magnified 100-fold, not only because Archie was his child, but because Archie was a royal, a grandson of the sovereign, and therefore a figure under constant scrutiny. As the motorcade navigated the streets toward the palace, Harry's mind replayed every moment leading to this flight. The frantic phone call, the aide whispering the words "school records," the disbelief that followed. How could such critical information be mishandled? How could inconsistencies in his son's records remain unnoticed until now? And most importantly, who stood to gain by this revelation? These questions pressed on him like weights, refusing to release until answers were found. The public, of course, was oblivious to the inner turmoil. On social media, speculation was rampant. Tweets flew by the second. Harry's back in the UK. Is Archie in danger? What did the palace reveal about Archie's birth certificate? Is this the scandal we've been waiting for? The frenzy was immediate. The internet is merciless, relentless, and yet indifferent to the human emotions behind the headlines. Harry knew this all too well. Every move he made would be scrutinized, every expression analyzed, every word dissected for meaning. Inside the palace gates, the briefing awaited. Advisors and legal experts had been preparing for hours, and Harry was met with a stack of documents thicker than any he had seen before. School records, official correspondences, legal notes, and the infamous birth certificate, each item carrying implications that could ripple across both public and private spheres. And as Harry examined the files, one detail made him pause. The father's name listed on Archie's official records did not align with historical documentation. Not by a small margin, not by a clerical quirk, but a blatant, undeniable discrepancy. Emotional spikes surged through him. Shock, anger, confusion, fear. Every parent knows the moment when something about your child's life feels threatened, when the foundations of trust are questioned. Now, Harry experienced it magnified by the weight of royalty, media, and history. And yet, amidst the emotional turmoil, clarity emerged. He had to act, and act swiftly. Hesitation was a luxury he could not afford. But the documents themselves were not the only challenge. The reactions from those around him introduced new complications. Palace aides, some loyal, some nervous, whispered half-truths and theories. Advisors offered conflicting counsel, One urged a public statement. Another insisted on total discretion. The legal team debated potential implications, while PR specialists considered how every move might be interpreted by the media. The Duke was now balancing multiple crises simultaneously: the private protection of Archie, the public perception of his family, and the historical accuracy of royal records that had been taken for granted for generations. The next hours would be a test of instinct, strategy, and resolve. Every call, every conversation, every step toward resolution required precision. Misstep, and the story could spiral beyond control. Misinterpretation and the fallout could be catastrophic, not just for Harry, but for Archie, for Meghan, and for the legacy of the Sussex lineage. And Harry, a man often criticized for impulsive decisions, now had to navigate this unprecedented storm with caution and clarity. At this point, the intensity of the situation intensified. A confidential message arrived, warning of additional leaks poised to emerge if certain measures weren't taken. The palace was no longer just a place of protocol. It was a chessboard, and every piece moved with consequence. Harry's mind raced. What could be true? What was manipulated? And most importantly, what would be revealed next? Now, imagine standing in Harry's shoes. Thousands of miles traveled, adrenaline still coursing from the urgency of the flight, documents in hand that threatened to redefine history, a child's identity in question, and a world watching every move. How would you react? What steps would you take first? Would you confront the palace officials directly? Or try to secure the safety and certainty of your child before anything else? These are the agonizing questions that now guided the Duke's every thought. As evening fell over London, the atmosphere inside the palace remained electric. Conversations were hushed but urgent. Doors opened and closed with soft but tense urgency, and the whispers of potential scandal lingered in the hallways. Every royal protocol, every ceremonial tradition, suddenly felt irrelevant against the weight of truth pressing in. And Harry, standing at the center of this storm, knew one thing. What he did next would define not only his son's future, but the narrative that the world would believe for years to come. But just as he prepared to take the next steps, just as strategies were being laid out and communications coordinated, an unexpected development arrived. A single aide, previously unnoticed in the commotion, handed Harry a document, one that had not been in the initial briefings. Its contents were cryptic, yet impossible to ignore. Details that contradicted previous assumptions, evidence that could both clarify and further complicate the situation. And as Harry's eyes scanned the page, a realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. The story was far deeper, far more complex, and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. What happens when the most ordinary documents in the world suddenly become weapons? That's exactly what Harry was about to discover as he stepped into the hushed, tense environment of the palace briefing room. The documents he had been handed, school records, birth certificates, and confidential notes, were supposed to be mundane, official, routine. Yet, in his hands, they became instruments capable of rewriting history, shaking the royal family, and igniting a scandal that would dominate global headlines for weeks. The first record he examined was Archie's school enrollment form. On its surface, it looked like a standard administrative sheet: name, date of birth, parent or guardian, emergency contacts. But as Harry's eyes scanned the details, he froze. The father's name listed did not match his own. Not a spelling error, not a minor typo, but a completely different name. A name that, if taken at face value, would fundamentally alter perceptions of Archie's identity and legitimacy. Harry's mind raced. How could such a glaring error exist in documents that were supposed to be verified by multiple layers of administration? How had no one noticed before now? And most importantly, who stood to gain from releasing this information? It wasn't just a clerical mistake. It felt deliberate, almost like a message intended for him, a test he hadn't signed up to face. He leaned back in his chair, momentarily silenced by a wave of emotions: disbelief, anger, confusion, and protectiveness for Archie. Every parent knows that instinct, the one that drives you to shield your child from harm, even before fully understanding the threat. Harry's instincts were firing at maximum capacity. He had to act. But act carefully, because every move in this delicate chess game could have consequences far beyond what any ordinary parent would face. Meanwhile, his aides and legal advisors crowded around the table, whispering urgent updates and tentative theories. One suggested that the records could be the result of a systemic administrative error. Another warned that media outlets would seize on every tiny inconsistency to craft a narrative of scandal and betrayal. Harry barely heard them. His attention was focused, razor-sharp, on understanding the gravity of the revelation. Questions piled up like storm clouds. How long had these inconsistencies existed? Who had access to the records before they were leaked? Could this be the work of someone within the palace, or was it a calculated move by the press to destabilize him? Every possibility seemed both plausible and terrifying. Even as he formulated a plan, another layer of complexity emerged. Some of the records contained not only administrative details, but also personal observations, commentary on Archie's upbringing, and notes hinting at external influences on his development. Harry realized that this leak wasn't just about clerical discrepancies. It was a direct intrusion into his family's private life, exposing them to scrutiny that could be sensationalized by the media and used against them in subtle, manipulative ways. The emotional weight pressed down on him. Rage, fear, protectiveness. Each emotion collided within him, fueling a sense of urgency he could not ignore. Every parent knows that feeling, the instinct to defend, to confront, to protect at all costs. But Harry also knew that acting rashly, even with the best intentions, could have consequences far beyond what he could anticipate. Questions dominated his thoughts. How deep did the discrepancies go? Who orchestrated the leak? What was their endgame? And most importantly, how could he shield Archie from the fallout? The answers were buried in layers of bureaucracy, secrecy, and perhaps intentional manipulation. Every document he reviewed added complexity. Every conversation hinted at hidden agendas, and every hour increased the pressure to act decisively. As the meeting continued, one advisor spoke cautiously. "Sir, the evidence suggests that while some inconsistencies may have been accidental, others appear deliberate. We need to determine whether this was oversight, negligence, or something more calculated. Time is critical." Harry's eyes narrowed. He had already felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, but now it became clear that the situation was not only urgent, but potentially dangerous. He leaned back, taking a deep breath. Protecting Archie, understanding the full scope of the discrepancies, confronting those responsible, and navigating the inevitable media storm. Every challenge loomed large, each decision critical. And yet, amidst the chaos, one thought remained clear. He could not allow his son's identity to be compromised, manipulated, or questioned. Not now. Not ever. And just as he began to outline the next steps, preparing for confrontation and action, another revelation arrived. An unexpected report indicating that some palace insiders had intentionally amplified the inconsistencies, possibly to provoke a reaction, possibly to manipulate events in their favor. The implications were staggering. Harry now faced not only errors and omissions, but intentional interference, a force working against him and Archie, hidden in the shadows of tradition and protocol. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine waking up to a world where your child's identity is suddenly being questioned by millions of strangers. That was the reality for Prince Harry as the palace prepared for what would soon become a full-blown media storm. Outside, the world was already buzzing with speculation, and inside, tension had reached a level that no amount of preparation could fully contain. Every advisor, every aide, every whisper mattered. Every misstep could spiral into chaos. News of the discrepancies in Archie Harrison's school records and birth certificate had begun leaking, first in small circles, then more broadly. Social media exploded with conjecture, theories, and outright speculation. Is Archie's father really Prince Harry? One headline screamed, "Royal Scandal. Birth Certificate Inconsistencies." Read another. Millions clicked, shared, and commented. The frenzy was immediate, relentless, and unavoidable. The palace had never faced a leak with this personal dimension before, and Harry felt the weight of it pressing down on him, heavier than ever. Harry sat in a quiet room at the palace, documents strewn across the table. Advisors attempted to brief him on the growing public reaction. "Sir," one whispered, "the press has picked up on the story. Analysts predict this could dominate headlines for weeks." Harry didn't need a prediction. He could feel it in the air, the rising tension, the curiosity, the sense that the world was about to scrutinize every detail of his life and his son's life. The first challenge was managing the immediate fallout. Social media was already distorting facts, amplifying rumors, and creating narratives that could influence public perception for years. Every tweet, post, and headline seemed designed to provoke a reaction. Harry knew that if he reacted impulsively, it could make matters worse. But waiting too long would allow misinformation to dominate. The balance was delicate, and the stakes were enormous. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the atmosphere was charged. Legal advisors debated potential actions to protect Archie's privacy and ensure the integrity of his records. Communications officers drafted statements that walked a fine line between acknowledgement and denial, attempting to control the narrative without escalating the controversy. And Harry, at the center of it all, had to make decisions that would affect his son's identity, his family's legacy, and his own public image. As he reviewed the documents again, Harry noticed patterns he hadn't seen before. Multiple references indicated that inconsistencies in Archie's records had been flagged internally but left unresolved. Emails between officials suggested discussions about how to handle the situation, with some advocating for secrecy and others urging correction. It became clear that the issue wasn't a simple oversight. It had been known, debated, and ultimately ignored. Harry's mind raced. Who had made these decisions? What were their motivations? And why had they waited until now to allow the information to surface publicly? Every angle he considered pointed to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Someone within the palace had deliberately allowed these discrepancies to persist, and now the consequences were unfolding with Harry caught in the center. Adding to the tension, reports from his aides indicated that additional documents were being circulated quietly among select insiders. These documents contained communications that could further implicate officials and potentially escalate the scandal. Harry realized that controlling the flow of information was now critical. He had to act quickly to protect Archie, contain the leak, and understand the full scope of what was happening before it spiraled completely out of control. As the hours passed, Harry coordinated with his most trusted advisors, legal experts, and security personnel. They developed a multi-pronged strategy: secure the records, verify the authenticity of all documents, manage media messaging, and prepare for direct engagement with palace officials. Every move had to be deliberate, precise, and calculated. The room hummed with a mixture of fear, urgency, and determination. Then came the first major revelation. A confidential memo, previously overlooked, detailed a meeting from several years prior in which officials discussed the very discrepancies that were now public. The memo suggested that attempts to correct the records had been met with resistance, and that some officials believed leaving the inconsistencies unresolved would be less disruptive than addressing them openly. The thought that someone had prioritized convenience over accuracy and over a child's identity filled Harry with both disbelief and anger. He paused, considering the broader implications. If the records had been manipulated or left unresolved intentionally, what else might have been mishandled? Could this extend beyond Archie? Was the integrity of other family records at risk? The questions multiplied, each more troubling than the last. Every assumption about trust and reliability within the palace now seemed questionable. Despite the chaos, Harry had to maintain composure. He focused on actionable steps, confirming the discrepancies, identifying those responsible for their persistence, and ensuring that Archie's records were corrected and protected moving forward. Every advisor in the room understood that this was more than a bureaucratic issue. It was a matter of family, identity, and legacy. The media, however, was not waiting. Leaks began to appear online, with snippets of documents, screenshots, and commentary being shared widely. Public reaction ranged from outrage to curiosity to blind speculation. Analysts debated the meaning of the discrepancies, some suggesting administrative oversight, others implying deliberate deception. Harry knew that once a narrative took hold in the public consciousness, it would be nearly impossible to reverse. Timing, strategy, and control were everything. Adding to the pressure, Whispers within the palace suggested that some officials were attempting to influence how the story unfolded publicly. They were strategizing, subtly guiding media coverage, and trying to shape perceptions. The realization was chilling. The situation was no longer just about correcting records. It was about navigating a complex web of power, loyalty, and manipulation. Harry's determination grew. He would protect Archie at all costs, uncover the truth, and confront those responsible for allowing or orchestrating the discrepancies. Every action had to balance immediate protection with long-term strategy. He knew that confronting the palace directly could escalate tensions, but failing to do so could leave Archie exposed to further complications. Then, an aide approached with news of another document, one that had surfaced unexpectedly. This record contained references to communications between senior officials and external parties, indicating that the discrepancies had been noticed outside the immediate administrative chain. The implications were profound. Someone had been aware of the inconsistencies and potentially ready to exploit them. Harry realized that the stakes were higher than he had first imagined. Questions raced through his mind. Who was behind the leak? Was it someone seeking power, influence, or leverage? Or was it a calculated move to destabilize Harry and Meghan? And what further information might surface if he didn't act quickly? Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and every hour increased the urgency to respond decisively. As the day wore on, the pressure mounted. Advisors worked frantically, drafting statements, securing records, and preparing for every possible scenario. Harry, meanwhile, focused on the most critical priority: ensuring that Archie's identity, records, and privacy were protected. Every decision required careful consideration, every action a balance between urgency and strategy. And just as it seemed that the immediate crisis might be managed, another bombshell arrived. A confidential communication suggested that certain inconsistencies had been deliberately amplified, possibly to provoke a reaction or to manipulate the unfolding narrative. The realization struck Harry like a thunderclap. This was no ordinary administrative error. This was a deliberate attempt to influence events, to control the narrative, and perhaps to test his response. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if, in the middle of a storm, someone handed you a letter that changed everything? That's exactly what happened to Prince Harry as he navigated the escalating crisis over Archie's records. Amid the chaos of leaking documents, media speculation, and internal palace tension, a single envelope arrived, sealed, marked confidential, and emanating a gravity that instantly demanded his full attention. Harry broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The contents were brief but shocking, detailed notes from a senior palace official revealing prior knowledge of the inconsistencies in Archie's school records and birth certificate, along with a timeline of discussions spanning several years. The letter implied that someone had made a deliberate choice to leave the errors unresolved, effectively allowing the discrepancies to fester until now. It was not merely negligence. It was an intentional decision with ramifications Harry was only beginning to grasp. As he read, a wave of emotions surged through him: anger, disbelief, protectiveness, and an almost suffocating frustration. How could anyone prioritize protocol, secrecy, or politics over the integrity of a child's identity? Every parent knows the instinct to shield their child from harm, to safeguard their future, and to act decisively when danger looms. Harry felt that instinct now, sharpened and intensified by the magnitude of what he held in his hands. The letter also hinted at additional communications that had occurred behind closed doors, between palace officials and external parties. These discussions suggested not just awareness, but a coordinated effort to control when, how, and to whom the information about Archie's records would be revealed. The implication was chilling. Someone had been managing this situation like a chessboard, anticipating moves, orchestrating outcomes, and manipulating perceptions. Questions swirled in Harry's mind. Who had made the decision to leave the discrepancies unresolved? Was it a single individual acting independently, or a coordinated effort by multiple officials? And, most importantly, what was their endgame? Every layer of secrecy he peeled back revealed another, deeper mystery. Every answer prompted more questions, and every revelation increased the stakes. Harry looked up from the letter, meeting the eyes of his advisors. Their expressions were a mix of concern and urgency. Some whispered theories about who might be responsible, while others debated the legal implications of the revelations. "Sir," one aide murmured, "if this information reaches the public without context, it could spark a scandal that may be impossible to control." Harry nodded, fully aware that managing perception was as crucial as addressing the factual discrepancies. The emotional intensity of the moment was palpable. This wasn't just a bureaucratic or administrative issue. It was a deeply personal matter. Every parent can relate to the desire to protect a child, to ensure that no harm, emotional, reputational, or otherwise, comes to them. But Harry's challenge was magnified by his public position, the historical weight of the monarchy, and the relentless scrutiny of the global media. Every step, every decision, every word mattered. As the room hummed with discussion, Harry refocused on actionable steps. First, he had to verify the authenticity of all documents and communications. Second, he needed to secure Archie's records, both current and historical, to prevent further leaks. Third, he had to prepare for direct engagement with those responsible for the discrepancies and the leaks. And fourth, he had to manage the narrative, anticipating the inevitable media frenzy that would follow. But even as plans were formulated, another twist emerged. A confidential briefing indicated that some of the inconsistencies had been discussed with external parties years earlier, individuals outside the immediate administrative chain. This revelation suggested that the situation was not only internal but also exposed to external influence, potentially increasing the risk of leaks, manipulation, or misinterpretation. Harry realized that the web of intrigue surrounding Archie's records was far more extensive than he had initially imagined. His thoughts turned to Meghan. How would she react to the news? What advice or insight might she provide? As a partner, she had always been a steadying force, offering perspective and support in times of crisis. But he also knew that this situation transcended ordinary challenges. It involved legal, historical, and reputational stakes that few outsiders could comprehend. Together, they would need to navigate the treacherous waters of palace politics, media speculation, and family dynamics. Meanwhile, outside the palace, the media continued to speculate. Headlines ranged from sensational to speculative, each amplifying the crisis in its own way. "Prince Harry rushes back amid Archie birth certificate scandal," read one. "Royal records in question. Is Archie's identity at risk?" blared another. Social media exploded with commentary, opinions, and conjecture. Millions of eyes were on the unfolding story, each post and tweet shaping public perception, adding pressure to an already volatile situation. Harry's advisors worked tirelessly to manage the fallout, drafting statements, securing records, and preparing contingency plans. Every action had to be precise, deliberate, and measured. Misstep could not only damage public perception, but also compromise Archie's privacy and identity. Every layer of strategy required foresight, calculation, and a clear understanding of the potential consequences. Then came another development that raised the stakes even further. A confidential report revealed that some officials had possibly amplified the discrepancies intentionally, perhaps to provoke a reaction or to manipulate events in their favor. The realization hit Harry like a thunderclap. This was no longer just an administrative error or a mismanaged record. This was a calculated attempt to influence outcomes, to manipulate narratives, and potentially to destabilize him and Meghan. Every instinct told Harry that he needed to act quickly. Protecting Archie's identity was paramount. Understanding the motivations behind the discrepancies was critical. And confronting those responsible required a careful balance of authority, strategy, and diplomacy. Every decision would carry consequences not only for the immediate crisis, but for the long-term integrity of the family and the monarchy. He considered the broader implications. If intentional manipulation had occurred, what else might be at stake? Could other records have been tampered with? Were there additional documents waiting to surface, each with the potential to escalate the crisis further? The realization that the issue might be systemic added layers of complexity and urgency to his next steps. As the evening progressed, Harry and his team formulated a plan. They would verify every record, secure Archie's documentation, identify and confront those responsible, and prepare for public statements as necessary. Every contingency was accounted for, every angle analyzed. Yet, even with preparation, uncertainty remained. The unknown elements. Who was behind the amplification, what additional documents might surface, how the public would react, loomed large over every decision. The emotional weight pressed down relentlessly. Anger, frustration, protectiveness, fear, all surged through Harry simultaneously. Every parent knows the tension of defending a child, but for Harry, the stakes were exponentially higher. This was Archie's identity, his legacy, his life under scrutiny. And every move Harry made now would either protect or expose him further. Then, just as strategy was being finalized, another message arrived. A tip that suggested someone within the palace might be actively monitoring Harry's response. Every action he took could be observed, analyzed, and potentially used against him. The realization added a new layer of urgency. Not only did he have to protect Archie and manage the situation, but he also had to be aware of surveillance, internal politics, and potential manipulation. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if protecting your child meant confronting secrets that could shatter an entire institution? That's the dilemma Prince Harry faced as he moved into the next phase of this escalating crisis. The flight back to the UK, the leaked records, the confidential letters, all were just the beginning. As the hours wore on, a flurry of communications arrived. Some were alerts about additional documents potentially surfacing. Others were updates on media speculation and public reaction. Harry realized that time was against him. The longer he waited, the more narratives could take root, and the harder it would be to protect Archie and manage the situation effectively. He paused to consider the broader implications. If intentional manipulation had occurred within the palace, it could not only affect Archie, but also set a precedent for controlling information about other family members. The realization added urgency to his next steps. He needed to secure the facts, confront those responsible, and ensure that no further harm came to his son. Directly addressing his team, Harry laid out a strategic plan. Step 1. Secure all of Archie's records, past and present. Step 2. Verify the authenticity of all documents and communications related to the discrepancies. Step 3. Prepare for potential confrontations with officials who allowed or facilitated the inconsistencies. Step 4. Anticipate and manage media narratives to prevent misinformation from taking hold. Step 5. Maintain Archie's privacy and protect him from the emotional fallout of public scrutiny. As the plan unfolded, Harry also considered Meghan's perspective. Her insight, support, and understanding of both the media landscape and palace dynamics would be critical. He knew that together, they could navigate the storm, protect their son, and respond with both strategy and authority. But even as the plan took shape, another twist emerged. A confidential report suggested that the palace had been monitoring Harry's actions since his arrival, observing his interactions with advisors, tracking decisions, and potentially preparing to influence outcomes. Every step he took was under scrutiny, adding another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation. Harry understood the magnitude of the challenge. Protecting Archie now required not only strategic action, but also psychological awareness. Every advisor, every aide, every official could have motives, loyalties, or agendas that Harry needed to navigate carefully. One misstep could unravel the carefully constructed strategy and expose his son to further risk. As night fell over the palace, the urgency of the situation intensified. Communications were constant, documents reviewed, strategies updated. Harry remained laser-focused on the task at hand, defending Archie's identity, uncovering the truth, and confronting those responsible for compromising it. Every decision carried consequences not only for the immediate crisis, but for the long-term integrity and safety of his family. And just as he was about to take the first decisive steps, another piece of intelligence arrived, one that suggested the inconsistencies were connected to a broader scheme within the palace, a plan that extended beyond Archie and potentially involved manipulation of records, perception, and narratives affecting multiple family members. The realization struck Harry with full force. The challenge before him was far larger, more complex, and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if the very institution you trusted to protect your family suddenly became the source of betrayal? That was the harsh reality Prince Harry faced as the palace prepared its response to the growing storm over Archie's school records and birth certificate. The discrepancies weren't just errors. They were evidence of a systemic problem, potentially intentional, that threatened not only Archie's identity but the reputation and stability of the Sussexes in the public eye. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Advisors whispered in corners, legal teams pored over documents, and communications officers drafted statements designed to preempt the media frenzy. Every official move was calculated, every word scrutinized. And yet, Harry felt the weight of urgency pressing down like a physical force. This wasn't merely a public relations issue. It was a deeply personal crisis, a confrontation with negligence and possible manipulation at the highest levels. The palace response was swift, but it contained contradictions. Public statements emphasized that records were administrative oversights and under review, while internal communications suggested awareness of discrepancies spanning years. Some documents hinted at deliberate attempts to control the narrative, ensuring that information reached the public in a way that minimized internal accountability. The dissonance was striking. Harry realized that the institution itself was sending mixed signals, part denial, part acknowledgement, part manipulation, all while his son's identity hung in the balance. Harry's legal team quickly identified the core issues. The discrepancies in Archie's birth certificate and school records could have far-reaching implications, particularly if interpreted as evidence of misrepresentation or negligence. The team recommended immediate verification of all records, securing original documents, and preparing a comprehensive report to clarify the facts internally before confronting external pressures. Every step had to be airtight. Any misstep could ignite a scandal that would dominate headlines for weeks, if not months. Yet even as these preparations were underway, the media outside continued to spin narratives. Headlines ranged from sensationalist speculation, Archie's birth certificate in question, Harry under fire, to subtle insinuations questioning the integrity of the palace's administrative processes. Social media was ablaze with commentary, ranging from outrage to conspiracy theories. Every post, tweet, and article added pressure to a situation that was already teetering on the edge of chaos. Amid this turmoil, Harry focused on one thing above all: Archie. Protecting his son required not just controlling the documents, but understanding the motivations behind the discrepancies and leaks. Who had allowed these errors to persist? Who might have deliberately amplified them? And why now, at a moment when Harry and Meghan were navigating life outside the traditional royal sphere? The questions were relentless, and the answers elusive. As Harry reviewed internal communications, a pattern emerged. Certain officials had consistently flagged discrepancies, suggesting corrective action, only to be overruled or ignored. Others had proposed strategies to mitigate potential fallout, emphasizing secrecy and delay over transparency. The documents painted a picture of a palace bureaucracy deeply entangled in its own protocols, yet potentially aware of the consequences for Archie and the Sussexes. The realization was chilling. The inconsistencies were not merely administrative. They represented a choice, a calculated decision to prioritize institutional appearance over the truth of a child's identity. Every parent knows that protecting a child sometimes means confronting uncomfortable truths, and now Harry was facing that reality on a scale few could comprehend. The emotional stakes were immense. Rage, frustration, and protective instinct collided with the need for strategic action. Every decision carried weight. How to secure Archie's records, how to confront those responsible, how to prepare for media scrutiny, and how to ensure that the truth prevailed without creating further chaos. Harry's focus was unwavering, yet the pressure was unrelenting. Then came an unexpected twist. A confidential memo surfaced indicating that some of the discrepancies may have been intentionally magnified, perhaps to provoke a reaction from Harry, perhaps to control the narrative, or perhaps as part of an internal power struggle. The implications were staggering. The situation was no longer just about clerical errors, but about manipulation, strategy, and influence within the highest levels of the palace. Harry paused, taking in the full scope of the crisis. The documents, the leaks, the contradictory statements. all suggested a complex web of control and deception. Protecting Archie required not just correcting records, but understanding the motives and actions of those who had allowed, or perhaps orchestrated, the discrepancies. Every advisor he consulted emphasized caution, yet urgency remained paramount. The media storm outside continued to escalate. Rumors, half-truths, and sensationalist claims dominated headlines. Analysts debated the implications of the discrepancies, speculating on motives and outcomes. Social media users shared theories ranging from administrative negligence to deliberate sabotage. Every moment of inaction risked allowing the narrative to solidify, potentially damaging Archie's identity and the Sussexes' reputation. In response, Harry formulated a series of strategic actions. First, secure all records, both past and present, to prevent further leaks. Second, verify each discrepancy, documenting its origin and any corrective attempts. Third, identify officials who were aware of the inconsistencies and determine their motives. Fourth, prepare controlled communications to address media speculation without compromising privacy or security. And fifth, ensure Archie remained shielded from public exposure and emotional fallout. As these plans were set into motion, Harry also considered Meghan's role. Her understanding of media dynamics, public perception, and the intricacies of the palace hierarchy would be invaluable. Together, they would need to navigate not only the immediate crisis, but also its long-term consequences. Coordination, trust, and precise timing would be essential to protect both Archie and themselves. Even as strategy developed, another layer of complexity emerged. A confidential report suggested that certain officials might be monitoring Harry's actions, tracking decisions, and potentially preparing to influence outcomes in real time. The realization added another dimension of risk. Not only did he need to protect Archie and correct records, but he also had to anticipate interference, manipulation, and observation from within the institution itself. Harry understood that the challenge was unprecedented. Protecting Archie meant confronting not just mistakes, but potential deliberate acts of deception. It required strategic foresight, emotional resilience, and an unflinching commitment to truth. Every choice, every conversation, and every decision mattered. Missteps could have profound consequences, while decisive action offered the chance to secure both his son's identity and his family's legacy. As night descended over the palace, preparations continued. Advisors worked around the clock, legal teams reviewed documents, and communications specialists drafted potential statements. Harry's focus remained laser-sharp: Archie's protection, verification of facts, and understanding who had allowed, or amplified, the discrepancies. The stakes were monumental, and the pressure unrelenting. Then came the next revelation. Additional internal communications indicated that the amplified inconsistencies were part of a broader strategy, potentially involving multiple officials and extending beyond Archie. The implications were staggering. The situation could impact more than just one child, touching on protocols, records, and perceptions across the royal family. The realization made Harry's mission clear. He needed answers, accountability, and action before the situation escalated beyond control. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if a single document could shatter years of carefully constructed narratives? For Prince Harry, that moment had arrived. Buried within the confidential files he had been reviewing was a document unlike any other, a record so detailed, so precise, and so potentially explosive that it could change not only the public perception of Archie Harrison, but also the internal dynamics of the palace itself. The document contained a comprehensive history of Archie's school records and birth certificate, cross-referenced with internal communications, memos, and notes spanning several years. At first glance, it appeared mundane, standard administrative tracking. But a closer examination revealed inconsistencies that were impossible to ignore. Dates that didn't match, names that conflicted, entries that suggested deliberate oversight. Harry's pulse quickened as he realized the implications. This was no minor clerical error. This was a systematic issue, one that had been allowed, or possibly orchestrated, over an extended period. Every parent knows the gut-wrenching feeling of seeing their child's identity questioned. For Harry, it was amplified exponentially. Archie's name, his birthright, his very record of existence, had been compromised in ways both subtle and glaring. And the question that haunted Harry was simple but terrifying. Why? Why had this been allowed to persist? And who benefited from its revelation at this critical moment? The legal team quickly began analyzing the document, tracing the origins of each discrepancy. Some appeared to be simple administrative mistakes, easily explainable and correctable. Others, however, suggested deliberate manipulation or neglect. Internal emails hinted at awareness of these errors, with discussions about whether to correct them or leave them unaddressed. The document painted a complex picture of bureaucratic inertia, conflicting priorities, and potential internal politics. Harry's thoughts immediately went to the broader implications. If these discrepancies had existed for years, who else might have been affected? Were other family members' records also vulnerable? Could this be part of a larger pattern of oversight or deliberate influence within the palace? Each revelation deepened the sense of urgency and gravity. Even as the legal team worked, Harry felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. Every decision he made now could have far-reaching consequences. Correcting the records required precision. Confronting those responsible required strategy. And managing the public perception of the situation required careful communication. Any misstep could escalate the scandal, putting Archie and the Sussexes at risk of scrutiny, misinterpretation, or worse. The emotional impact was immediate. Anger, frustration, and protectiveness surged within Harry. He felt a visceral need to act, to defend his son, and to uncover the truth behind the discrepancies. Yet he also knew that acting impulsively could be dangerous. Strategy, caution, and foresight were paramount. Every move had to be deliberate, every word measured. The document also revealed patterns that were subtle but telling. Certain officials had flagged discrepancies years prior, suggesting corrective action, only to have their recommendations ignored. Others had debated whether to correct the errors publicly or quietly, ultimately opting for inaction. The picture that emerged was one of a complex, opaque system where decisions were influenced not only by protocol, but also by internal politics, loyalties, and possibly personal agendas. Questions flooded Harry's mind. Who had the authority to leave these discrepancies unresolved? Were they acting alone or in coordination with others? And why now, after years of inaction, had these records been leaked or brought to light? The implications were staggering, touching on trust, accountability, and the very fabric of the institution. As he reviewed the document further, Harry realized that the inconsistencies could be interpreted in multiple ways by the public. To some, they might appear as minor administrative errors. To others, they could suggest deliberate negligence or even an attempt to manipulate perception. The ambiguity added to the challenge. Every public statement had to anticipate potential interpretations. Every action had to minimize risk while protecting Archie. The media storm outside continued unabated. Headlines screamed of scandal and mystery, while social media platforms buzzed with speculation. Analysts debated the meaning of the inconsistencies, some suggesting bureaucratic error, others implying more sinister motives. Every moment that Harry delayed responding increased the risk that misinformation would take root, shaping public perception in ways that could be difficult to counteract. Harry convened a meeting with his advisors, legal team, and communication specialists. Together, they began mapping out a strategy. Secure all relevant documents, identify individuals responsible for oversight, verify the authenticity of every record, and prepare a controlled response to potential leaks. The process required meticulous attention to detail, with every possible scenario accounted for. Even as the strategy unfolded, new layers of complexity emerged. Confidential notes indicated that some discrepancies had been amplified, possibly to provoke a reaction or manipulate narratives. This revelation underscored the urgency of acting decisively, not only to correct errors, but also to confront intentional manipulation. Harry understood that the challenge was no longer simply administrative. It was strategic, emotional, and political. The stakes were immense. Archie's identity, privacy, and public perception were at risk. The palace's reputation and internal dynamics were at play, and Harry's response would set a precedent for how such situations were handled in the future. Every decision required balancing immediate protection with long-term consequences, managing the media while navigating palace politics, and safeguarding his family while seeking accountability. As night fell, Harry's determination intensified. He knew that inaction was not an option. Protecting Archie required courage, strategy, and relentless focus. Every document, every memo, every conversation had to be considered in the context of a larger, complex system, one that had allowed errors to persist and possibly manipulated their revelation for strategic purposes. Then came the next revelation. An additional set of records had surfaced, connecting some of the discrepancies to external parties. These communications suggested that the issue was not confined to internal bureaucracy, but involved outside influence, potentially including media operatives or advisors seeking to shape the narrative. The implications were staggering. The situation had evolved from administrative oversight to a web of manipulation, control, and public perception. Harry understood the gravity. Protecting Archie now required not just correcting errors, but anticipating further leaks, managing relationships within the palace, and preparing for a media landscape eager to sensationalize every detail. The emotional weight was immense, but his resolve was clear. He would defend his son, uncover the truth, and confront those responsible, no matter how complex or politically charged the situation became. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when family loyalty clashes with personal truth? That was the storm Prince Harry was about to confront. The discrepancies in Archie's school records and birth certificate had ignited not only a media frenzy, but also a tense standoff within the royal family itself. Every conversation, every glance, every whispered word carried weight. Behind closed doors, tensions were simmering, and Harry now had to navigate a high-stakes showdown that balanced family dynamics, institutional tradition, and his son's future. The room was thick with tension as Harry entered the private meeting space within the palace. Senior family members, advisors, and key officials were already gathered. The air,